Welcome back to Ballboy Media. I'm LJ, and today we're going to be talking about some basic NBA trading rules that you should be aware of as the NBA approaches the trade deadline on February 6th. If you're new here, please like and subscribe. All of your support is much appreciated. Let's get right into it. So, in terms of the salary cap, the NBA's salary cap has several layers, and they're all very important. The salary cap line is $140.6 million, whereas the luxury tax line is over $170.8 million. Just over that is the first apron line at $178.1 million, whereas the second apron line is $188.9 million. Now, you might be asking, what do these aprons mean? What is the meaning of this, and what happens if a team is over the apron? Well, there are penalties. When you go over the first apron, your salary matching is limited, and it's limited to less than or equal to 100%. Now, what does this mean? Typically, when you are a non-apron team, you can take back 125% of your outgoing salaries in a trade in salary. So, for example, if I was to be giving up a player that's making $9 million and taking back a player that's making $10 million, I could do that if I was a non-apron team. But when you're in the apron, you cannot do that. Additionally, you wouldn't really see this at this time of year, but there are no sign-in trades. Now, this isn't, no sign-in trades at all. There are no sign-in trades if you are over the apron and the trade would keep you over the apron. If the trade somehow gets you under the apron, so if you're taking in less salary in this sign-in trade deal, then by all means you're allowed to make it, as long as it gets you under the apron. Additionally, there's a smaller mid-level exception, or MLE. The mid-level exception is basically extra cash used to sign players, and it typically stands at $12.8 million. That is for, non-apron teams. However, for first apron teams, this is $5.2 million, and for the second apron, which faces all of these penalties as well as having no access to the mid-level exception, this is $0. So you're going from 12.8 to 5.2 in the first apron, 5.2 to 0 in the second. Additionally, second apron teams have no access to the buyout market. Now, this isn't related to trading. This is where teams may buy out players, so basically paying them their salary either up front or over time and letting them walk and become free agents. This is big for contending teams because typically teams that are vying to contend are those teams that you'd see in the second apron. Additionally, there are cash and pick limitations in trades, and I have them right here. You cannot put cash into trades if you are a second apron team. Basically, one common thing that contenders may do, teams that are hard-pressed for cash and salary cap space, not cash, is they will send money to other teams in exchange for low draft picks, so second-round picks typically. You're not allowed to do this, and that is going to, be a big deal for some of these teams because second-round picks, there have been some gems over the years, namely Nikola Jokic, maybe a Manu Ginobili type player, and even today, there are various gems found in the second round, and you just don't have the ability to do that if you are a second apron team. Additionally, there are limitations on picks. You cannot trade your first round pick 7 years in advance. Now, how this works is, at the start of this NBA season, we were in 2024, which means the league year started in 2024, and the latest pick you could trade was 2031. Your pick is frozen if you're in the second apron, so now you can no longer deal that 2031 pick. Additionally, if you are over the second apron in 2 out of 4 seasons, your first round pick automatically moves to the back of the first round. So there are severe penalties for the second apron, and there are lesser but still significant penalties if you are in the first apron. Now, there's only 9 apron teams, but that is roughly a third of the league, so that is kind of big. Over the first apron are the Knicks, the Heat, the Lakers, the Nuggets, and the 76ers, and over the second apron are the Bucks, the Celtics, the Timberwolves, and the Suns. Matching contracts, let's talk about it. As I said earlier, non-apron teams can accept up to 125% of outgoing salary. First apron teams can only accept, and second apron teams can only accept 100%. So, here we have a deal, and we're going to go through it. So, I like Colin Sexton, and I think he's a good player. I think he would be a better player on the Orlando Magic because what the Magic need is a fast scoring guard who fits their defensive scheme. Not that Cole Anthony can't be that, but I just think overall Sexton is a better player, and I think he brings more to the table in terms of volume, scoring, and having the ball in his hands. Now, I'm proposing this trade where you trade Sexton's $18.4 million salary to the Utah Jazz for the combined salaries of Cole Anthony and Caleb Houston. Total, those two players, their salaries combined to roughly $15 million, we'll call it. I did the math, and this trade works. Because 125% of $14.9 million, which is the outgoing salary in this trade, is $18.6 million. That means, in exchange for these two players specifically and their respective deals, the Magic can take in up to $18.6 million. And because Sexton is over this figure, this trade works. Under this figure, Because Sexton is under $18.6 million, he's just under about $200,000 under the figure. This trade is possible under the NBA's collective bargaining agreement. A little bit more contract language. Aggregating contracts, what does that mean? That basically means pairing multiple contracts together. That is something else that cannot be done by second apron teams. So just something to watch. On top of that, what is an expiring contract? It's exactly as it sounds. An expiring contract is a contract that has 1 year left on it and will be terminated in the following year, if not given an extension. So Ben Simmons is a great example of this. He's making $40.3 million this year, but he is a free agent. He is not under contract next season. So he is a massive example of an expiring contract. A little bit on draft picks. So each team starts with 2 tradable picks per draft. You get a first-round pick and a second-round pick, and all picks begin as tradable up to 2031. Next league year, teams will have access to their 2032 first and second-round picks. Protected picks are picks that do not convey if within a certain range at the time of transfer, and this time is set by the team that is dealing through negotiations. So typically you'll see a pick is lottery protected. What does that mean? That means that if the pick is, the draft lottery happens and the pick is in the lottery, then the team that traded it originally retains the pick. And sometimes what happens is they'll say, if it doesn't convey this year, it'll convey this year. Or let's say you have a lottery protected first round pick this year and it is in the lottery, so the team gets their pick back. They might reach an agreement where it's like, and this is, made at the time of the deal when it is dealt originally. They might say, okay, we'll trade you the 2025 first round pick protected in the lottery. But if it does in fact land in the lottery and we don't give you the pick, you get our 2026 and 2027 second round picks. Something like that might happen. Now a pick swap is similar to a protected pick, but you either get the more or most favorable or less/least favorable. What that means is you're basically giving the rights to your pick to another team or vice versa. So we saw this with the Bradley Beal trade. The Suns surrender the favorability to their picks to the Washington Wizards. Basically, they said, okay, in 2030, let's say 2030, the Wizards will have access to the Suns' pick if they choose. So, let's say the Suns are picking 10th and the Wizards are picking 20th in 2030. The Wizards would definitely say, okay, we're going to take the Suns' pick, and then they give the Suns their pick in return. That's how a pick swap works, and you'll see that come into action as we get around draft season more. The Stipien rule, additionally, is another rule that's very important when considering trading, and that is that you cannot trade first-round picks for back-to-back seasons. Stipien was an owner for the Cavs and is infamous, and is the reason that this rule was created, because he kept trading first-round picks, and now teams are not allowed to follow in his footsteps. So what makes a buyer? Couple things. Need for improvement. Sometimes there's teams that are kind of on the fringe of being contenders or on the fringe of being playoff contenders, and they need to improve. The trade deadline is a perfect time to do so. Assets or capital. Sometimes a team looks at what they have in terms of assets and they say, okay, we can afford to make a move. Such an example would be the San Antonio Spurs. They have a lot of draft picks coming up. They might say, you know what? We have a player that's on GOAT trajectory. Let's bring in some pieces with this extra capital we have. Desire to trade. In order to be a buyer, you have to be willing to trade. Teams that are going to stay stagnant, that are not going to move during the trade deadline, will not be buyers. Those teams will not be buyers nor sellers. Additionally, you need some buyers or teams that need to win. For example, the Golden State Warriors and Los Angeles Lakers. In my opinion, these teams need to win this year, and while I don't believe either of these teams can be made into championship contenders overnight, another piece might propel them to a greater stage, which is not necessarily a championship. As we know, Steph Curry and LeBron James are getting up there in age, and we know Father Time hasn't quite caught up to them yet, but the clock is ticking, and for these two, stars of yesterday, still stars today in their own right, but they need help at this point in their career, and teams like this could also be buyers where they need to bring in more players. So, on that note, our first buyer is the Golden State Warriors. Now, the Warriors are a non-apron team. They are 330,000 under. What does this mean? So, the NBA's salary cap aprons, and if you haven't watched part 1, I will link that in the description. I go over the aprons, the luxury tax, everything you need to know about the trade deadline, which is in less than a month from today. The first apron has a couple of mitigations that teams that are under it are influenced by, and some of those relate directly to trading. So if I'm the Golden State Warriors and any other team on this list, I want to stay under that first apron. Now, in terms of assets, the Warriors have first-round picks up until 2028 that they can trade. Those are going to be some prime picks for dealing. They also have second-round pick in 2026 and 2028 through 31, as well as Gary Payton II and Kevon Looney on expiring contracts. Additionally, they also have Brandon Podziemski on the second year of a rookie contract, and Andrew Wiggins has still proven to be a valuable player in today's NBA. He's making $27.2 million with 2 years left on his deal after this one. I don't expect them to part from him, but if they were to swing a deal for, say, Jimmy Butler, that might be a player that's included in the deal. Team needs / potential targets for them, in my opinion, a definitive two-guard. Steve Kerr has kind of been running the system where his rotation is a little spotty at times in terms of minutes staying the same for players. He kind of experiments game to game. Additionally, Dennis Schroeder has been playing a lot of two-guard, and I don't know if necessarily that's the best fit. As we've seen so far in Golden State, his numbers are significantly reduced from what they were in Brooklyn when he was the head honcho. They could also use centers. Kerr this week earlier said that Steph Curry really has never played with a stretch 5, and that is true. That's a true statement. He's had guys like Kevon Looney. Looney is great in his own right. He's a stellar rebounder and was part of their championship run in 2022. He played a big role, but he's not a three-point shooter, never has been. Additionally, they need veterans and locker room guys. I feel like every team needs that, and if you're the Warriors, you just want to go all in for talent at this deadline, if you're planning on going all in at some point, as Steph Curry battles with time. The potential target I have for them is Nikola Vucevic. He's averaging 20.6 points per game and 10.4 rebounds, shooting very high splits from the field. I would not trade for Jimmy Butler because I feel like he's kind of not a locker room guy, and I think what the Warriors need, they're kind of on a slump right now, and we know that teams that are slumping, sometimes the morale is down. I feel like adding Jimmy Butler would not necessarily make the morale go up. While I don't know if that's true for Vucevic, at least we can count on Vucevic to not bring the vibes down, whereas Butler, I have that concern as we've seen it in Miami and Minnesota and several other places. Vucevic is a stellar three-point shooting center, and I believe next to Steph Curry he will flourish as he has already this season. Second buyer is the Houston Rockets. Now, this is a team that's a lot younger than the Golden State Warriors. They're also a non-apron team. They're $15.2 million under the salary cap, and they have a lot of notable assets. They have several of their own first-round picks, and they also have Phoenix first-round pick in 2027, which who knows where the Suns will be at that time. They also have Cam Whitmore, who is a second-year player. He is just a phenomenal guy. On the court, he's averaging 10 points per game and only 15.9 minutes per contest this season, and he has less usage with Tari Eason. Now, he's gotten a little bit of a spike as Eason has been absent the past couple of days, past couple of games, and over the past couple of weeks, but I believe that Houston may not have a spot for him, so I think that if they were to want to swing for a big star, Cam Whitmore would be part of that package, and we know that He's an elite volume scorer. When he gets minutes, he's very capable of being a 3-level threat. And I'm interested, if you're another team, you might think to yourself, okay, this is a guy that we might look to get in a deal. Team needs and potential targets for them. They need 3-point shot makers. We know they're a tantalizing defensive presence, but in terms of shooting the 3-ball, it gets questionable at times, especially when Jalen Green isn't connecting, which happens sometimes, I understand. They might go star hunting. I don't expect it this year because I feel like the Rockets, while they may have a plan, I feel like we as NBA fans may not have seen this exponential rise from them, and I think sometimes they might look at it and say, maybe we didn't expect this rise to be this good this early either. Now, I think in terms of targets, they should target an elite guard and maybe some players from super sellers. What I mean by super sellers is teams that are going to do a fire sale. They're going to push all their chips out and just get assets and really thin the margins of their teams. I think the Nets are a team like this. I think the Trailblazers could potentially be a team like this. Additionally, Jimmy Butler, I think, makes a lot more sense on Houston than he does Golden State. I think, he's a Texas guy. I talked about him in a previous video, and I think that having him as a guy to go to in late game situations could be very beneficial for Houston. But I think, honestly, if I'm them, I might sacrifice a little extra, maybe 130 cents on the dollar, to target Anthony Simons. Simons is having a good season. He's averaging 18 and 5, and he's shooting 42% and 36% from deep. While those numbers may not jump off the page, Simons, when you watch him, he meets the eye test, and he's capable of putting together stretches that are just phenomenal, and I believe that he is exactly what this Houston team needs. Additionally, I think Josh Green could be an interesting piece, although an injury to Brandon Miller, I believe, negates that happening. Malcolm Brogdon at $22.5 million is also certainly an interesting player. And then Simons. The deal that I'm looking at here for Simons would be Simons plus Robert Williams III and Matisse Thybulle for Fred VanVleet and Jock Landale. I think this is a good trade that benefits both teams, especially if there is a plethora of picks attached for the Trailblazers. Our third team is the Oklahoma City Thunder. They are also a non-apron team. They are $16.8 million under, and they have a lot of notable assets. As we know, the Thunder are sitting on a plethora of draft picks spanning all the way to 2031. Just a couple they have Miami's first-round pick, which is protected in 2025 and is unprotected next year. So it's lottery protected this season. If the Heat make the playoffs, the Thunder will get their pick. If they do not make the playoffs, the Thunder will get their pick next year unprotected, which, with Butler gone, who knows what direction the Heat will be in. They also have Philadelphia's first-round pick protected 1 through 6, but I'm going under the assumption that Philadelphia will not be among the 6 worst teams in the league, and they won't end up top 6 in the lottery. Who knows, maybe they will. If that's the case, the pick will just convey to Oklahoma City next year. They also have Denver's first-round pick in 2027 and Dallas's first-round pick in 2028, as well as all of their own first-round picks. The reason I included these picks from other teams is I feel like teams and GMs may look at the Thunder and think, wow, this is a phenomenal future. Let's target some of the other picks they have in their arsenal because they may be more valuable than the Thunder's own draft selections. I think this team, all they need is really some wing help, and I don't even think they need that. I think if they rolled with it, I think it'd be completely fine. They are obviously off to a phenomenal start. They're playing at a 68-win pace, which would be the most in the NBA, I believe, since the 2016 Warriors. And maybe just some fringe additions, rounding out this team around the edges, although if it's at the sake of chemistry, I say don't do it. In terms of potential targets, I think all signs point to if this team does make a deal, that deal is Cam Johnson, although I have an asterisk here because Jake Fisher earlier reported that Oklahoma City has not had meaningful dialogues or there is not documented proof of having dialogues with the Brooklyn Nets. So that makes me doubt that a trade would happen between these two franchises, and I think ultimately what Oklahoma City will do is lean towards keeping this team and riding it out and making hopefully an NBA Finals run. Now our last team, our last buyer is the Sacramento Kings. They're also the fourth non-apron team on this list. We know they were entangled in some mid-season drama, but since they have been dominant, they're on a great stretch right now. They have broken 500 and are now in the playoff push. It looked like they were completely out of it when they were 13 and 20. In terms of notable assets, their 2027 to 31 first-round picks are tradable. I do not believe they can trade their first-round pick. They do not have their first-round pick this year, which means I do not think that the 2026 first-round pick is eligible to be traded. They also have a couple second-round picks, and just to note, their 2031 first-round pick is the least favorable between them and San Antonio. This team could use wings, and it seems like that's kind of what they're targeting. They also, I feel like they could use some long-term durability. And by that, what I mean is keeping the infrastructure solid for going forward. I think the Kings, as we know, they had a tough 2000s, late 2000s, tough 2010s, and now that they've finally broken through, I think they want to stay on the top of the mountain for as long as possible. I think being a playoff team for them is something that, if you're a fan of the Sacramento Kings, it's something that you are striving for, and potentially a move like this could swing them into maybe a dangerous team in the first round. Now, we haven't seen them make it out of the first round in a long time, but maybe there's a deal on the table where they acquire that extra piece, and not only are they streaking now, but it pushes them over the edge to make a playoff push. Some potential targets, I have Cam Johnson again, and then two wings from the Portland Trailblazers, Jeremy Grant and Denny Avdia. I think Avdia is infinitely more interesting. I'm not quite sure with Jeremy Grant what you're getting, because not only is he on the older side, but I feel like his role is kind of synonymous with that of DeMar DeRozan, whereas Avdia is kind of a Swiss Army knife. He plays defense and he's good on offense as well. Some other potential buyers, the Los Angeles Lakers. We know that teams with LeBron James on them are always looking to get better, and there's no doubt about it that Los Angeles is definitely inquiring on some other players. I'm not quite sure if that's maybe a point guard, a cheap point guard, or maybe a center. There's been talks about Vucevic for them, talks of Walker Kessler from the Utah Jazz. Whatever it is, I'm sure the Lakers will make another move to build around LeBron in his final seasons, or maybe not. I don't know. We'll see how long he lasts in the NBA. It's already been 20 years. Maybe he has another 20 in him. The Grizzlies, I don't expect the Grizzlies to make any significant moves as well, but maybe, again, just adding some fringe guys. San Antonio is an interesting team because they might swing and add a player to pair with Victor Wembanyama, maybe take a guy from the Pelicans like a CJ McCollum or Brandon Ingram, get a real co-star next to Victor Wembanyama, and maybe make that playoff push that the Kings and others are hoping to make. Phoenix Suns, we already saw them acquire Nick Richards, and today he debuted and had 18 points and 11 rebounds, just a stellar debut for the new Suns player. I think they may make another fringe move to get the team better as they also gear up to make a playoff push. And my final team for other potential buyers is the Indiana Pacers. I think the Pacers are a dark horse team to make a sneaky big move, and I'm not quite sure what that move is. It might be acquiring Cam Johnson, it might be acquiring someone else, but I think the Pacers are ready to win more big games. We saw them make it to the Eastern Conference Finals next year, and I'd be surprised if they were quiet at the trade deadline.
We'll be talking about what makes a seller and the sellers at this year's NBA trade deadline. If you're new here, please leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And comment down below a team that you'd like to see make a trade at this year's deadline. So, what makes a seller? A seller is a team that has a desire to add capital, which may mean a couple of things. Maybe getting worse for a better draft pick, and then adding draft picks and valued players from other teams. The Brooklyn Nets are a fantastic example of this. They traded Dennis Schroeder after a 10-15 start, and since they have gone 4-15. The Nets got 3 second-round picks in this transaction, and since they underwent the deal, they've dropped from the 9th best lottery odds to the 6th best. Very good. So our first seller is the Washington Wizards. They're currently 6-35, which is the worst record in the league by a comfortable margin. Couple players of interest they have. Kyle Kuzma, questionable year for him. This is, career lows almost across the board when you consider his career as being, since he's kind of entered this stage with the Wizards and towards the end of his tenure with the Lakers. The statistics are not good. However, we've seen what Kuzma can provide to a team. Malcolm Brogdon, sage point guard. I feel like he still has a lot left in the tank. 2 years removed from a Sixth Man of the Year and about a decade removed from a Rookie of the Year. Brogdon is definitely an able point guard for a team that may need him. Jonas Valanciunas as well. He is making only $9.9 million this season, with similar figures in the next 2 seasons, and he is averaging 11.7 points per game as well as 8.2 rebounds per game. Now, all 3 of these players I feel like can play, and in the right scenario can be a very valuable asset to a team that needs them. Our second stellar is the Utah Jazz, who are 10-31, which is last in the Western Conference, and they too have a couple players of interest. John Collins is, definitely a guy whose name has been thrown around here and there over the years, and now he finds himself in rumors with the Sacramento Kings. He, has found a groove with Utah this season. He's averaging 18, 8, and 3 on 52.5% shooting. One thing that I found to be notable with him is he is shooting 43.8% from 3 on 3.3 attempts per game. Now, typically you see these centers and you're like, oh, they're shooting 40% from 3, but then you look at the volume and it's only about 1 3-point attempt per game. I think with Collins, 3.3 attempts per game is legit for a guy of his size, and I think that's definitely a real thing, that he can be, occasionally a threat from down, across the 3-point line, and he can extend the floor for an offense that may need that. Additionally, Colin Sexton, he's averaging about 18 points per game this season. He's a premier rim runner, shoots high percentages from the field, about 48% I believe. Now, a couple teams that I think would be interested in Colin Sexton. Orlando Magic. Now, we've heard their names, affiliated with several scoring guards, because we know that the one thing that they're lacking in is offense, and I feel like that's been heightened with the prolonged absences of Paulo Banchero, who just recently made his return, as well as Franz Wagner. I'd like to note Memphis as well in this company. I think Memphis could be a sneaky team to acquire Colin Sexton. Now, Marcus Smart has given them some ample contributions. However, I think the move to Sexton may be one that's beneficial, and it provides another great guard alongside Ja Morant and Desmond Bane, as well as Scottie Pippen Jr. I think adding Sexton would be an underrated move for the Grizzlies, and I think they might look to consider it if they feel like moving on from Marcus Smart is the correct play. The team also employs Jordan Clarkson, who was the 2021 Sixth Man of the Year. He is currently sidelined due to a foot injury, but when he's healthy, he's a microwave-type player, and, once he gets going, he gets going. Our third team is the Brooklyn Nets, and they're 14-30 in the Eastern Conference. That's good for a 12th. The only player that they have of interest is maybe the highlight of this trade deadline, and that's Cam Johnson. Now, Cam Johnson we know what he brings. I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing me talk about him. He averages about 20 points per game on 50, 40, 90 splits from the field. But they have a couple other players that I think could be in contention to be traded. Now, I don't think that either of these are going to happen, but I would be, not surprised if they were to happen, if that makes sense. If they happen, I'd be like, okay, that was a smart move. The first of which is trading Ben Simmons to a team that is looking to get off of a max contract. Now, Ben Simmons is due for $40.3 million this season, and he is on an expiring contract. This is, kind of big for teams that, if they're looking for more cap flexibility in the future, they might be looking to get off salaries. This is a deal and a player you might want to add. I'm not quite sure. You look around the league, I'm not sure who they might be. I have 2 teams written down. Milwaukee, if they really found themselves growing tired of Chris Middleton, may trade him to Brooklyn. Similarly, the Suns could do that with Bradley Beal, where maybe he would waive his no trade clause if he knew that the Nets would proceed to buy him out after getting traded. Additionally, I have Portland. Maybe if they don't get a substantial return for Jeremy Grant, they might be like, all right, let's rid ourselves of this long-term contract and focus on using our cap space to gather assets in the current day. Additionally, I like a deal that sends Nicholas Claxton to the Hawks. I'm very high on Claxton as a player that is better than Clint Capella in terms of just an all-around game. I think Capella, although he is a more sage veteran, and we know that he's more disciplined on the court and stronger than Claxton, I think if you're Atlanta, you look for long-term pieces, and Claxton is on a multi-year deal, whereas Capella is an expiring free agent. I think that gives both teams something they might want in free agency. With the Nets, you're getting an expiring deal, you're getting Claxton off the books, you're also going to get some draft compensation alongside Capella, who maybe you find another deal for him at the deadline. Who knows? I like that, and on that same token, I think Nick Claxton's multi-year contract is going to be very helpful for Atlanta. If they're looking to really build some continuity around Trae Young, I think that is a good move to make. One last thing, I think in terms of front runners for Cam Johnson, I've heard a lot of mixed reports. I do not believe that Oklahoma City is in the running for him. I think that trade would actually surprise me if it were to happen. I think they're just going to keep their chips for this season. I think there's two big front runners, and I think Sacramento should be the number one front runner, and I think that behind them is Indiana. I think they will be in a bidding war for Johnson. Both two teams on the brink, positive records after slow starts to the season, now looking to make that playoff push. I think it's going to be a bidding war between those two franchises. Our fourth team is the Portland Trail Blazers. They are 15-28 currently, and they also have a couple players of interest, although I'm not quite sure if the market is the same for these players. So Jeremy Grant, as I touched on, another veteran player on a multi-season contract. He, just gives you a little bit of everything, kind of a Swiss Army knife type player. We've seen him be a versatile scorer before. He can knock down a couple threes a game, plays good defense. I like Grant as a player, but I'm not sure if teams would look at his contract and be turned off by trading for it. Anthony Simons, I believe that Simons may be off limits. However, Portland may not agree with me, and I think that Portland would be wise to move on from Simons in favor of Scoot Henderson in the wake of his recent hot streak. Now, again, if I'm getting rid of Anthony Simons, and this is the reason that I think the Trailblazers should move off of him, is that he's currently in his prime or his early prime, because I do think he can get better. And I think teams like maybe the Orlando Magic, who are needing that scoring guard, would overpay for him. I think Simons is definitely a talented player, an ethical hooper, if you will, and I think that teams may want to pay 130, 140 cents on the dollar for his services. Additionally, Robert Williams III is a name to watch. We saw he made an all-defensive team when he was healthy with Boston. This is a guy whose defense is still there. His offense, he can provide in bursts, a couple buckets, a couple alley-oop dunks. The real concern with him, as we know, is just the injuries. I believe that with Rob Williams, if you can get him on the court, he will be a very good asset, which is why I think he will be going to Houston. I think that the Ime Udoka connection is still there, and I think that a deal is in play if they wanted to make it for maybe a pick, as well as Jayshawn Tate and Jock Landale. One last thing, I think that they could potentially move on from Deni Avdija. Now, I think this is very unlikely because they traded their 2029 first-round pick for him. However, I think, again, that theory of other teams paying 130, 140 cents on the dollar. I saw an article, forgive me, I forgot who wrote it, but it was about the Grizzlies potentially adding him and him being the missing piece that they need. I think they'd have to pay overwhelmingly in order to acquire him. Our fifth sellers, the Chicago Bulls, they are 19-25, and they have really two big names, and it's Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic. Now, Vucevic, I could see him fitting in Los Angeles, Golden State, a couple of these teams that seem like they're one piece away from unlocking a higher power, and then you're banking on the upside of all-time greats in Steph Curry and LeBron James. Zach LaVine is also an interesting piece to me. I feel like, he would be a great fit on the Pistons, or maybe another team looking to make that playoff push. Pacers, anybody? I think maybe. And I believe that, LaVine is definitely still talented. He's actually maybe considerably, still in his prime. We saw him have an off season dealing with injury last year, but I think he's back and better than ever this season. Vucevic, again, he's averaging like 20 and 10. Both of these guys are star assets, and I think for Chicago to really launch into that rebuild, it would be wise to move on from both of these players and free yourself up for next year. I've heard some rumblings about Kobe White as well, but I'm not quite sure if they move him. Again, 130, 140, maybe even 150 cents on the dollar for Kobe White. We know he's a great player, but in terms of moving forward, I'm not convinced that he is, able to be the second or third best player on a championship team. So I think they may move on from him as well. We'll just have to see. We know that the Bulls in the past have kept players through the deadline. Thank you for watching. As I said in the beginning, please be sure to like and subscribe and comment a trade you'd like to see down below. Thank you.